want to talk about preventing objections. And I did a video on this a little while ago, but I really want to focus on this part because it seems to be the most consistent thing that I'm focusing on with my agents as far as listening to their sales calls, identifying holes and gaps, figuring out what we can do to make the quality of your conversations even stronger so that when you get to the end, you actually get very little objections at all. Let's start with your script. Go ahead and take it out, take a look at it. How many questions do you have on there that you're getting to know your customer? Think about it. Think about their current situation. How long have they been thinking about putting something in place? Have they ever had life insurance before? During their search, what have they found? Did they click on an ad that prompted them to inquire? If so, what about that ad prompted them to inquire? If they've gotten any quotes, what have they been getting quotes for? If they had existing life insurance before, how much coverage did they have previously? Was it with a job? Did they have it on their own? If they no longer have it, why? What happened to that policy? Did it go up in price? Could they not afford it anymore? Was it with a job? Why is it so important to understand someone's current situation? Because you have to understand their mindset of where they're at now with what they think they know about life insurance. Now, those are just surface questions that I just gave you. Once you get the answers to those questions, you have to dig even deeper. So let's say someone had life insurance before and you found out that they haven't had it for 3 years, or they had it with a job and they no longer have that job. You might need to know how much coverage they had before. Why is that important? Because let's say you sell final expense insurance, which we do, and the policy they had with their employer was $500,000. You're probably going to want to ask them, so are you looking for that amount of coverage now, or has that changed for you? Right? So you're setting those expectations for how much coverage they think they can get. Because if they had it with a job, chances are it was dirt cheap. And why was it dirt cheap? Because it was probably a group term policy, which is temporary, and their employer subsidized it. So I'm still sitting here in this sort of situational phase for quite a while until I uncover what they had, if anything at all, if they're just now starting their search. If so, what have they clicked on? What quotes have they seen? How much coverage are they possibly looking for? Have they gotten any quotes so far? So you have to sit there and uncover that for a while. If you don't, it's going to open up the first hole, which is you don't know any of that. You assume that just because this person is on the phone with you, that they're looking for 30,000 in coverage or less. You get down to the quotes and they tell you that's not enough coverage, or they tell you it's too expensive, or they tell you they need to think about it because the amount of coverage you're offering for the monthly price doesn't match what they used to get previously. So you had the opportunity to kind of set them straight early on, and then you missed it. Now you have to backpedal. So once you uncover that, then you can move over to kind of summarizing that up. Okay, so you haven't had any coverage for a couple of years now. You used to with your job. So why is putting something back in place so important to you now? Right? As opposed to what I normally hear on trainings, which is usually people inquire for 3 different reasons. Either a loved one passed away, or someone recently got sick, or whatever the case may be. That is just putting multiple choice options into someone's mouth and not allowing them to think for themselves. Even though that's not a yes or no question, it's still taking the easy way out. Don't take the easy way out. Ask someone the question and let them tell you the answer. What expenses are you looking to cover with a policy when you do pass away? Which would be another one. Don't say, so are you looking at this for funeral costs? Or so are you looking at this to pay off your house? Again, no multiple question answers, no yes or no answers. Like, are you looking at this to pay for a funeral? Yeah, you don't want to do that. Anytime you box your customer into a corner for yes or no answers, you're going to miss out on possible additional opportunity of information that they could have given you had you asked. But back to the why. Why is it so important for you to put something in place right now? So they're going to tell you their reason, their truth, not just 3 multiple choice reasons that apply to the majority, because it's too easy for them to say that one. I'm going to choose that one because that's much easier for me to just choose one of your answers than it is for me to tell you what's really going on in my life. So again, if you give them a multiple choice answer, that will create yet another possible gap or hole, because now you don't know the full picture. You're assuming you know the full picture because they chose an answer, but that doesn't mean you know the whole story. All right, so let's move on to the what expenses are you wanting to take care of when you do pass away. If they don't say final expenses or funeral costs, that's going to be a pretty big red flag for you to figure out whether or not this person is even someone you can sell, right? A sellable opportunity. If they say, well, I need to make sure the property gets paid off and my debts and loans get paid off, then you can elaborate with them and say, well, have you thought about the additional costs of a funeral or final expenses or anything like that? That's when you can figure out if this person is a good fit for you or not. The point of that section is you have to make sure that you guys are on the phone for the same reasons, right? You're on the phone to offer final expense coverage. Are they also on the phone for that reason as well? And if those reasons don't align and you're just assuming that because they're on the phone with you, because you sell final expense, that that's what they're looking for, you're going to get all the way to the end and you're going to find out it's not enough coverage, right? They need more coverage than that. So this is another opportunity for you to be able to identify that early on. So then you can segment and segue your way into explaining the differences between mortgage protection insurance and term insurance and final expense insurance, which is probably in some of the more advanced training that we do, but it allows you to identify the need. Okay, so let's pretend they do want it for final expense insurance. Now you're going to go into some of the more emotional questions, right? So God forbid you were to pass away tomorrow, because nobody knows the day or the hour. You know, who in your family will be the one responsible for going down to that funeral home, meeting with the funeral director, making all the decisions and paying for all the costs associated with your final expenses. And they're going to tell you who that person is. And at that point, if they say my kids, what I don't want you to do is say, oh, how many kids do you have? Do they live close by? Do you have any grandkids? How often do you get to see them? Now you have just taken yourself off of the emotional path of where you were supposed to go, to now you're going to talk about something that isn't going to help you get someone into that emotional mindset. You have to save those types of questions for way later. So the only next appropriate question would be, so I imagine you probably don't want your kids to have to pay for those expenses out of pocket, if they didn't have to. Is that right? Of course, they're going to say yes. But now here is the most important question that you are failing to ask. And that question is, but why though? But why? Why is it important for you to not be a burden on those kids? And then they're going to tell you. They're going to tell you why they don't want to be a burden on their kids financially, that they're married, that they have their own kids, that they're struggling, that they can't afford it. And if you fail to uncover that reason, now you are going to have another hole that you have created that you cannot use at the end when they tell you an XYZ objection, because now you don't know their why. You know who it's for, and you can assume you know why it's important to them, but they didn't say it. And because they didn't say it, you can't hold them accountable. So you have to ask the why question. Let me ask you a question. Why do you think it's important to know who your client's beneficiary is when we ask early on? Because it probably might not be the reason that you think. Yes, we need it for the application. Yes, someone needs to have a beneficiary. Yes, we want to use that when we talk about emotions and what that's going to do for their beneficiary if they don't get a policy or, all of the negative ramifications that could happen. But what you're failing to realize is you have to assume that who they list as their beneficiary is most likely the same person that they're going to have to discuss things with before they make a decision. So you're going to have to address that before they have a chance to give it to you. And typically this doesn't take place in this section, in the discovery section. Usually we talk about this towards the end, either before we quote or right after we quote. We bring this up at that point. Now, I imagine you probably are going to need to speak to your kids about this. I imagine you're probably going to need to speak with your spouse about this. However, and you go into what the next steps are in order to make sure they can qualify and how much time would they need to speak with their kids or their spouse to make sure that this is the right and appropriate fit for them. Essentially, what you need to be doing throughout your entire presentation is thinking 10 steps ahead of your customer. And every time you ask a question, you're moving that pawn piece on your chessboard one step further to that queen. And anytime you hear something that doesn't sound quite right, that sounds like it could be a red flag later, you need to stop and ask questions. And finally, you have to ask people, have you thought about what would happen or what it would look like if you decided not to do anything at all? What does that look like for your family? Because you just told me why you wanted to do it. So what happens if you find that you just can't put anything in place? You need them to tell you, what does that look like? And how important is it for you to make sure that that is put in place? That is another important tool that you're going to be able to use at the end to hold them accountable for putting something in place, because they already told you why they don't want to be a burden. And now they told you why they're not going to let their family not have a policy. All of those things you're now going to be able to use throughout your sales presentation to solidify those holes and gaps that you're causing when you just give someone a generic presentation that has nothing to do with them and their why. And finally, you need to summarize and you need to insert feeling words, what it's doing to them. So here's an example of a good summary. Okay, Mrs. Smith, let me see if I understand. So you had life insurance before, but you had to let it go because the price kept, going up and up and you couldn't afford it. So that probably caused you to feel a little bit frustrated and upset, with the insurance company as a whole. So now you've been without coverage for a couple of years, and that probably has you feeling a little anxious because if something were to happen to you, there's no coverage in place. And you already told me that XYZ would happen if you didn't. You've finally started looking now for the past couple of weeks, but everything's been kind of too expensive or confusing. And that probably makes you feel like you can't do anything because you don't understand it. But ultimately, you just want to put something small in place to take care of your cremation costs and your final expenses so that your kids don't have to come out of pocket and pay for that themselves because they're married and they have their own families and their own responsibilities, and you don't want to be a burden on them. And all of that will give you that feeling of peace of mind that you're looking for so that you can put this to bed and you don't have to think about it anymore. Does it sound like I got all that right, Mrs. Smith? If you can master the first 10 minutes of your discovery, I guarantee you will get little to no objections at the end. Good luck.